Questions to the Minister for Defence. The first priority question is in the name of Deputy Sean O'Farrill. Deputy O'Farrill.
Thank you very much, Last Councillor. Maybe you might advise us too, Last Councillor, when we are late to start questions, as we are today because we didn't have a quorum present. I think some additional time should be made available to us. But this particular question focuses on the unilateral decision, Minister, that you made to move from a 3 to a 2 brigade structure within the Defence Forces. And I suppose I'm asking you to indicate to us very clearly whether or not there was any prior consultation, any former consultation with the operational commanders of the 3 brigades in advance of that decision being made.
Minister number 1.
Thank you, Deputy, for the question. As the Deputy knows, the Department of Defence has civil and military elements, with Defence Forces headquarters being the military element. The Chief of Staff, who is head of Defence Forces headquarters, is my principal military advisor, and the Secretary-General of the Department of Defence is my principal defence policy advisor. Military command is vested directly in the general officers commanding the Army Brigades, the Defence Forces Training Centre, the Air Corps and the Flag Officer commanding the Naval Service. However, for matters relating to the overall management of the Defence Forces, including organisation of the Defence Forces, the Chief of Staff is the appropriate source of military advice. The decision to undertake a major reorganisation of the Defence Forces within a 2-brigade structure was progressed within this well-established overall management framework. Following my decision to initiate a major reorganisation of the Defence Forces encompassing the consolidation of 3 under-strength Army brigades into 2 full-strength brigades, I tasked the Secretary-General and the Chief of Staff with developing detailed proposals for my consideration. A joint civil-military group was established to progress this work, and I understand that there was broad consultation within the military organisation in this regard. This shaped the final proposals. In addition, the Strategic Management Committee provided a forum for discussing the work of this group. Final proposals relating to the reorganisation of the PDF, agreed between the Chief of Staff and the Secretary-General, were forwarded for my consideration in July 2012. I accepted these proposals in full. I also accepted further proposals relating to the reorganisation of the Reserve Defence Force following the completion of a VFM review in November 2012. I am satisfied that the reorganisation has maintained the operational capacity of the Defence Forces to the greatest extent possible within the available resource envelope. It also allowed the PDF to continue to fulfil all roles assigned. This remains, of course, a key focus, and I will continue to work closely with the Chief of Staff, Secretary-General, in this regard.
Thank you very much. Certainly have the height of respect for the present and previous Chiefs of Staff and indeed for the Secretary-Generals of the Department. But nonetheless, I would put it to you, Minister, that it indicated a weakness in the process that you applied, that there was in fact no consultation, no formal study done on the impacts of personnel, intelligence, operational, logistical or deployment implications for the Department of Defence and for the brigades, and that no consultation effectively took place with the brigade commanders. Now, I take your point that a 3-brigade structure with just a force of 9,500 people is not ideal, but it would not, I think, have resulted in any reduction in the operational outputs, in the training or deployment capacities of the Defence Forces. And I think very real problems have now emerged as a result of the decisions that you took unilaterally in advance of the Green Paper and White Paper process, and it would appear now you took that decision without either you or, it would appear, the then Chief of Staff having any engagement with the relevant commanders.
Minister.
I'm not aware of what real problems the Deputy says have now emerged, and certainly if there are particular problems the Deputy wishes to bring to my attention, I'll ensure those problems are addressed. A 3-brigade army structure was adopted, as the Deputy knows, in the 1990s, when the strength ceiling of the PDF was set at approximately 11,500 personnel. It was retained when the White Paper on Defence in the year 2000 revised the strength ceiling to 10,500 personnel. However, it was no longer viable to retain a 3-brigade structure with a strength ceiling of 9,500 personnel, which was the actual approximate strength of the Defence Forces when I became Minister for Defence, and indeed they were heading into a position where if we hadn't got additional financial allocations, whereby the numbers within 18 months to 2 years would have dipped below 8,000. At a PDF strength level of 9,500, which we set as the objective strength of the PDF,
Thank you, Minister.
There was too great an imbalance between administrative support and operational elements within the 3-brigade structure. This made the retention of a 3-brigade structure completely non-viable, as opposed to the viable 2-brigade structure that we now have.
Thanks, Les Councillor. Would the Minister not accept that retaining the 3-brigade structure would allow the Army to retain the structural architecture, to expand in times of crisis and need, to retain operational situational awareness, critical parts of the border with Northern Ireland, and critically retain operational command and control closest to where the operational outputs are being delivered? I put it to you, Minister, that to suggest that the operational oversight of permanent and reserve units in Donegal can be managed effectively from Rathmines is not credible, and indeed I'd go so far as to say that it indicates a level of recklessness in terms of the state's security. And it is equally not credible, Minister, just not credible, to suggest that units in Galway can be overseen from Cork, a situation that currently pertains. And they're just two of the problems that can be identified. And I think we engaged with you here and we had discussions in previous question times about other operational difficulties that are faced by members of the Defence Forces as a result of the decisions you've taken.
Final reply.
Well, what the Deputy is suggesting is that we have an architecture, but that we don't have the numbers that would allow it to make sense. The architecture, Deputy, that your colleagues had in government was an architecture based on a strength of 11,500 for a 3-brigade structure. When I came into government and assumed the position of Minister for Defence, we had a strength of 9,500. So if you're talking about architecture, an awful lot of the rooms in that house, Deputy, were empty. And they didn't allow for the type of flexibilities that you're suggesting, because if there was an emergency, you couldn't suddenly find an extra 2,000 members for the Defence Forces overnight. Indeed, on the basis of the financial envelope that I inherited from my predecessor, you couldn't have recruited any members to the Defence Forces in the years 2012, 2013 as we did. And while no study has been completed, I can tell the Deputy from my own experiences and engagement with officers and enlisted personnel on the ground, both at home and in overseas missions, I'm satisfied the organisational changes in the PDF have brought positive improvements in terms of the deployability and sustainability of the PDF.
Deputy McLaughlin is
Minister, as you know, the position of the Defence Forces Ombudsman was established after the then Captain Tom Clonan blew the whistle on very serious matters, and that led to the formation of this. There's been some controversy in recent times about the fact that you've made the office part-time, and you have appointed a person who served in the Defence Forces rather than somebody who hasn't. And would you like to give assurances around the role of whistleblowers or potential whistleblowers in the Defence Forces moving forward?
Minister number 2.
As the Deputy will be aware, the Programme for Government made a clear commitment to the introduction of whistleblower protection legislation. In this regard, my colleague, the Minister for Public Expenditure and Reform, published the Protected Disclosures Bill in July 2013, and it's anticipated, as the Deputy knows, this legislation will be enacted during this Dáil term. The bill has as its main objective the protection of workers against reprisals in circumstances where they make a disclosure of information relating to wrongdoing in the workplace. That application in all sectors of the economy, including the Defence Forces. The bill provides for a stepped disclosure regime in which a number of distinct disclosure channels are available, internal, regulatory and external, which the worker can access to acquire important deployment protections. 3 specific forms of protection are provided for in the legislation, which again will apply to all members of the Defence Forces. These protections are protection from the retributive actions of an employer, protection from civil liability, protection from victimisation by a third party. situation when an employer penalises an employee for having made a protected disclosure. The bill provides for access to appropriate redress mechanisms. For most workers, this involves making a claim for redress through the normal industrial dispute resolution mechanisms. That's through a rights commissioner or the Labour Court. In the case of the Defence Forces, Section 114 of the Defence Act already provides for an internal redress mechanism. Where a member of the Defence Forces thinks he or she is wronged in any way or in any matter. This system provides for the internal investigation of a complaint at various levels in the organisation, up to and including the Chief of Staff. In addition, as the Deputy mentioned, the Ombudsman for Defence Force provides an independent external redress mechanism for members of the Defence Forces. Under the new Protected Disclosures Bill, either or both of these mechanisms can be used where members allege penalisation for making a protected disclosure. The bill specifically provides that a member of the Defence Forces can make a complaint directly to the Ombudsman for the Defence Forces where they feel they've been penalised for having made a protected disclosure. They are not required to go through the internal redress system. And I am confident the provisions in this bill, once enacted, copper-fasten the safety and protection of whistleblowers across all sectors in the state, including the Defence Forces. And I am satisfied, Deputy, that the Office of the Ombudsman for the Defence Forces works extremely well and that there can be no valid allegation of any nature other than the current Ombudsman deals objectively and fairly with all complaints that come before him.
Minister, you will be aware of the very serious concerns of PD Fora around the decision that you took to make the Office of the Defence Forces Ombudsman part-time and to appoint retired Colonel Anthony McCourt. And just to be very clear, there's no question mark around the character or the sterling record of retired Colonel Anthony McCourt. The issue is that the PD Fora have is that you had an independent person in the role full-time over 7 years, and now it's moved to somebody who would have served in the Defence Forces, and regardless of decisions made, it could put a question mark over the adjudication of issues that may arise. So are you saying here very clearly that you're satisfied entirely with that decision and you believe it has had no negative impact whatsoever on anybody in the Defence Forces who may have issues that they want to have addressed?
Saying Deputy, I am, and I think it's regrettable that you should raise any issue concerning the current Defence Force Ombudsman, because the person concerned was a judge in the military court. He adjudicated on issues. There was never any question that he did so other than independently and objectively with fairness. And the issue that the Deputy is raising, in fact, as the Deputy is well aware, has been part, I think, of some approach taken by way of litigation by PD Fora. So I'm not going to enter into that, but the Deputy should be careful not to cast aspersions on the capacity, the independence, the objectivity of the current Defence Forces Ombudsman. The Deputy, on the one hand, said he's not doing that, and then he asks questions which are intended to do that. And I said to the Deputy previously, I find touching the Deputy's continuing concerns for whistleblowers, because some of his former colleagues in the Provisional IRA had little concern for whistleblowers. Their remedy was a bullet in the back of the neck.
Deputy Midlock.
Again, Minister Sheller, you can't resist the opportunity to try and pass the buck. I mean, your stewardship over all of these different departments is an absolute bloody disaster. You know, you have a situation here where PD Fora, who represents the vast majority of the men and women who serve in our Defence Forces, have grave concerns about the decision you made. And unfortunately, no aspersions being cast on retired Colonel Anthony McCourt. But it's an obvious point that they are making, is that if you have somebody who served, who is independent, not from a Defence Forces background, there full-time for 7 years, and you replace them with somebody who is part-time, who has served in the Defence Forces, whether we like it or not, that is, that could throw into question decisions that are made or create a perception. And that is the reality. So maybe you would deal with what PD Fora, who represent the overwhelming majority of members of the Defence Forces, their concerns that I am just merely putting to you here today. Deal with that. And maybe even you'd meet with them. Maybe you'd meet with people with a different view than yourself. Maybe rather than looking in the mirror and looking for wisdom all the time, there might be somebody out there, God forbid, who has an opinion that could be valuable to you other than your own.
Minister, final reply.
There you go again, Deputy. The person who was appointed following the holding of a competition. competition, which I had no hand or part in influencing. He's recommended following the outcome of that competition, and he was so appointed. And that is the end of it. He's an individual, who I said was a judge of the military tribunal. The deputy is suggesting that that isn't an appropriate person, someone who had been in that position. But of course, what the deputy is doing in this area is what the deputy does in other areas. He's seeking to pretend he's the friend of the ordinary rank and file of the Defence Forces and then pillaring anybody who's in a position of leadership in the Defence Forces. It's an interesting narrative, Deputy, that you and your colleagues are constantly engaged in. It genuinely, Deputy, doesn't fool too many people. And I can tell you, in the context of some of the history with which your party is associated, it'll get little traction within the Defence Forces.
Thank you, Minister.
Continue.
Paul McLaughlin is question number 8. Deputy McLaughlin.
The question is self-explanatory. I'm just looking for an update on any plans you have for the Defence Forces to participate in further EU battle groups.
Minister number 8.
Following government approval, Ireland will participate in the Nordic Battle Group in 2015 and the German-led Battle Group in 2016. The Nordic Battle Group will comprise Sweden, acting as framework nation, Finland, Norway, Estonia, possibly Lithuania and Latvia. The German-led battle group will comprise Germany, acting as framework nation, Luxembourg, Austria, the Czech Republic and the Netherlands. The planned Defence Forces contribution to each battle group will be a reconnaissance company and related combat support elements. It's also planned that Ireland will also take command of a multinational reconnaissance group headquarters, providing Ireland with a more significant role within these battle groups. The total number of Defence Force personnel involved in both Nordic and German-led EU battle groups will be approximately 175. However, this level of resource commitment will only arise should the battle group be called on to undertake an operation should Ireland agree to participate. The number of personnel involved leading up to and during the standby period may be in the region of 14 for the Nordic battle group and 10 for the German-led battle group. These personnel, mainly staff officers and NCOs, will be engaged in training and planning activities, serving in various appointments and posts. Any deployments, of course, of the above battle groups will be subject to the triple lock. Participation in EU battle groups underlines our commitment to the development of CSDP and enables us to continue to contribute effectively to UN-authored EU military and civilian crisis management operations in support of international peace and security.
Minister, I know it's not your own perspective on these matters, and indeed I presume if you had your way you would like to get rid of neutrality here in Ireland, but the reality is that there are concerns about the creeping militarisation of the EU over many years. Only 6 EU states are not full members of NATO. Just to quote, recently we have a report that talks about the NATO response force and EU battle groups are complementary, mutually reinforcing initiatives and calls for efforts to maximise synergies between them. And as you know, Minister, Denmark and Malta do not take part in these battle groups. So do you have any plans to adhere to what would be the wishes of the Irish people and not have Ireland involved in these battle groups, and to send a clear signal, aligned to the question earlier on from Deputy Daly about the use of Shannon, that we are genuinely a neutral country? That would reinforce the point that Deputy O'Farrell makes in terms of conflict resolution, that would give us credibility to be in a position to deal with conflict resolution when we're not aligned to NATO forces internationally.
Minister.
As the Deputy knows, we are part of the European Union, something his party is opposed to. We're engaged in the common security and defence policy, something his party disagrees with. We will continue to participate as we do, which is to the benefit of our defence forces. We will continue to make a contribution as we do. It's always interesting to know that the Deputy knows what the majority of the Irish people think on these issues. I can certainly tell the Deputy that in the context of the role that battle groups have played effectively, what they've done and our engagement in them has simply ensured that our defence forces reach a particularly high level of training that's important to them, that assists them when they're engaged in UN-sanctioned missions, and there's no intention of changing the approach.
Come on. Deputy McLaughlin.
Forces gain the same expertise in taking part in what they have done historically, UN peacekeeping missions, solely UN peacekeeping missions, without being aligned to NATO forces in these EU battle groups. And I've read from the report the view and the hope and the ambition of some people who oversee these matters at European level. Just to correct it, if this is part of the stuff that you do, Minister, you accused Deputy Dail of supporting Osama bin Laden. It's just absolutely, I don't know I can't even find a word to describe that type of assertion. In terms of Sinn Féin and the European Union, we're standing 4 candidates in the 4 constituencies. I'm hopeful we'll elect all 4, and no doubt assisted by your performance in your ministerial portfolio.
Thank you, Deputy. Final reply, Minister.
I think, and I'm open to correction, advocated no vote in every referendum held relating to the European Union. So you conveniently put forward candidates for the European Parliament while opposing the very existence of the European Union repetitively whenever given the opportunity to do so. So Sinn Féin is quite happy to look in 2 different directions simultaneously. In relation to battle groups, as would be evident from the Deputy, some of the European Union states that participate in battle groups are states that they themselves are neutral. And other neutral states have had no difficulty in participating, in contributing to common security and defence policy, and to engaging. And the government doesn't have any intention of changing policy in that regard.
Come out. Question number 9, in the name of Deputy Robert Troy. 9, 15 and 17 are a grouping. Deputies Troy, Deputy Durkin and Deputy Naughton. Deputy Troy to introduce.
Thank you, Laskin Cora. Minister, as you know, the new 21-year rule is in force, and as a result of that, there are a number of members of the Defence Forces who are gradually having to retire against their wish. And I suppose what I'm asking in this current climate, when there's very little job opportunities out there, and for people of the defence, existing serving members of Defence Forces who meet the health criteria would be enabled to carry on longer than the 21-year rule, and I'd welcome your opinion on that matter.
Come out. Minister, number 9.
Questions 9, 15 and 17 together as listed by the last Ceann. The unsatisfactory age and fitness profile of the Permanent Defence Forces, or the PDF, was an issue of serious concern during the 1990s. It was a subject to severe criticism by a series of external reports, mainly the Price Waterhouse Consultants and the Efficiency Audit Group, EAG. One of the key areas identified for urgent action by the EAG was the development of a manpower policy with an emphasis on lowering the age profile of PDF personnel. The EAG's report was accepted by Government in 1995. In an effort to alleviate the situation, the Government had already decided in 1993 to enlist personnel on a 5-year contract basis, following consultation with Permanent Defence Force Other Ranks Representative Association, PD-FORA. In 1997, agreement was reached with PD-FORA on a new manpower policy for the Defence Forces. This policy, applying to personnel enlisted after the 1st of January 1994, provided that service of private soldiers would initially be for 5 years, with the option to be extended to a maximum of 12 years, subject to meeting standards of medical and physical fitness and conduct. Longer periods of service were envisaged for non-commissioned officers. In 2004, PD-FORA submitted a claim under the Conciliation Arbitration Scheme for a further review of the terms of service applying to personnel enlisting in the PDF after the 1st of January 1994. A set of criteria was agreed with PD-FORA to provide longer careers for those who enlisted post the 1st of January 1994, while continuing to address the Government's objective of having an appropriate age profile to meet the challenges of modern defence forces. The criteria required that any person re-engaging after 12 years' service must be able to continue to operate at their current level, both at home and overseas, on an ongoing basis. Re-engagement is subject to the individual soldier meeting specified criteria in regard to physical fitness, medical category, successful completion of military courses of instruction, service overseas and conduct ratings. With the approach of 2015, the first effects of the agreement, whereby privates and corporals may not serve beyond 21 years, will be felt by Permanent Defence Force members in those ranks. A claim has been received, as the Deputy may know, from PD Fora for a further review in relation to this matter. In accordance with the normal procedures, the Association's claim is being dealt with under the Conciliation Arbitration Scheme for members of the PDF. I understand that discussions are taking place with the representative associations under a special subcommittee of Conciliation Council. As discussions are confidential to the parties involved, in accordance with the terms of the scheme, I do not in any way want to prejudice them or impact on their outcome. However, I do understand the concerns it raises for enlisted personnel due to be discharged in terms of their personal circumstances and the impact on their families. I am sure that all matters raised by PD Fora on behalf of their members are being comprehensively examined by Conciliation Council. I'm also cognizant of the need for continuing recruitment to the Defence Forces of young and fit men and women, so the Defence Forces can discharge all the roles assigned to them by government, both at home and overseas. It was for this very reason that this policy was introduced in the first place. As a negotiation process with the representative association is very much ongoing, I would not like to preempt or second-guess the outcome of current discussions in Conciliation Council, and it would not be appropriate for me to comment further on this issue publicly at this time.
Good luck, Deputy Troy.
Thank you, Last Concordia. Well, Minister, I welcome the fact that you seem to have changed tact in relation to this, and by virtue of the fact that discussion channels and a discussion process has opened up recently, that you are willing to consider the request by PD Fora. And no one is for 1 minute suggesting that we want a Dad's Army type situation. What we're looking for here at a time when there's limited job opportunities for people out there, that men and women who have served their forces and served their communities with distinction, who wish to continue on in service after 21 years, who meet the medical and fitness criteria, would be afforded that opportunity. And I think as I say, I welcome the fact that negotiations process has opened up, but I do think, Minister, you are the Minister, you are the man with responsibility, and if you are willing to accede to this request, then this request could be met.
Thank you,
and I think it would be beneficial for the members of the Defence Forces that the request would be met.
Minister?
I can tell the Deputy I haven't changed my tack at all. I think I may be wrong, but I think Deputy O'Fuil has raised this issue previously, as have other deputies. There's a process and a procedure to deal with issues of this nature. There was an agreement which I referenced, to which PD Fora were a party. There's now issues that have been raised by them, and they're absolutely entitled to raise those issues. And as I said, I don't want to say anything that would prejudice the outcome of a process that's now quite properly taking place. But I've said to the Deputy, I'm conscious of the concerns that have arisen and of the issues that have arisen. Those concerns and issues must be addressed also in the best interests of the Defence Forces generally, and in the context of ensuring the overall capacity of the Defence Forces to meet their objectives and to provide both at home and abroad for the services that they're required. But Deputy, this is an ongoing situation, and as I say, I don't want to say anything that will prejudice what is an important process that's presently taking place.
Deputy Durkin.
The Minister, and thank you for his reply so far. Could I ask the Minister whether the discussions now taking place are likely to be viewed in the rather unique set of circumstances now presenting themselves, in the sense that previous agreements entered into served their purpose excellently, but that there may well be a situation now where a review could be beneficial both to the operational element of the Defence Forces and also to meeting the requirements that the Minister may have in relation to adherence to the previous agreements and the possibility of opening up.
Thank you, Deputy. Minister.
I can say to the Deputy the review will take account of all matters, including the operational capability of the Defence Forces, and and skill issues. But I don't want to say any more than that in the context of the conciliation process that is underway at the moment.
Well, Deputy Durkin, briefly.
I thank the Minister for this rather short reply, and I appreciate the sensitivities of the situation. Notwithstanding that, could I ask the Minister whether or not he expects the negotiations now ongoing and taking place to be concluded?
Well, I certainly expect them to be concluded. I don't want to put a definitive time frame on this, but I think I don't want to say, Deputy, they'll be concluded by the end of this month, because there's always the possibility it'll take somewhat longer, but in the coming weeks they will be concluded, and there's a process in place, but it depends on both parties. I don't want anyone to be on a definitive time frame. There's still a little space for this to be worked through, but I expect in the coming weeks matters will be dealt with, but I can't predict with certainty. Will that happen in the month of May? Will it happen in the month of June? I can't predict.
Thank you. Deputy Troy.
Thank you, Dr. Torres. But Minister, just as you know, and you rightly said that my colleague Deputy O'Farrell raised this issue on a number of occasions, and on a number of occasions you previously stated that you didn't want to change the policy, that was your opinion. So can I ask you, is this process that's ongoing now, is it meaningful? Are you willing to listen to what PD4 are saying in relation and listen to their side of the argument, or is it just merely a charade that you have your mind made up and the policy is not going to change? Because I feel, Minister, as I said already, what are we telling the men and women who have served their communities with distinction and served the force with distinction? We're effectively telling them at 38, 39 or early 40 that they're no longer capable of work. And some of these men and women meet fitness to the very highest standards, meet the health to the very highest standards, and that they are well and truly capable of carrying out the work. And the international age, if you look at other countries, is in 50s and up to mid-50s. So I do think, Minister, it's an inefficient use of resources. Having heavily invested in training for these personnel that at the age of 38 and 39 were effectively saying we no longer want.
Thank you,
I do think, and I would hope that you would confirm that this process is meaningful and not simply a charade.
Minister.
I can assure the Deputy this process is meaningful. I think it's important also that we don't say that people will be rendered unemployable, because when members of the Defence Forces retire from the Defence Forces, a great many of them retire with particular niche skills that make them readily employable and very employable. And even in a difficult job market, they're able to obtain employment. Now, of course, that doesn't apply to everybody, and no one should pretend so. But, of course, the process is meaningful. It has to be meaningful. But I just say to the Deputy, you can't have all sides of this. You can't say you don't want a dad's army, but why can't we keep everyone there till they're 55 or 60? And on the other hand, have a defence forces that have the capabilities they require. And of course, when members of the Defence Forces retire, the benefit is that because we have this objective strength of 9,500, new members can be recruited. As I would have said in this House previously, there's going to be in the region of 400 new recruits to the Defence Forces this year. That's based on retirement. So there's job opportunities for young people coming into the Defence Forces when people retire. But I can say to the Deputy, this is a meaningful process. It's not an engagement, as he put it, for a charade, or it's not an engagement for decoration. It's a meaningful process, and I hope that it will produce an outcome within the coming weeks, but I can't preempt what that outcome will be.
Deputy Wallace.
Minister, I've heard your reply and understand your position on it. But I suppose I'd just like, in line with the other deputies, I'd just like to make the point that we probably would have people in their 40s being forced to retire, and given that they do have to pass fitness tests, and if they can't pass them, they can be discharged, which is fair enough if they're just not fit enough for the job. But given that some of these men are very young and probably in the fullness of health, and if they're very fit, and given the experience that they bring to the table as well, I mean, I think I'd just like to make the point that in other areas of work, like for example in construction, which is every bit as challenging physically, generally tradesmen work on to their late 50s, and labourers up to 54, 55. And if we were to employ soldiers up to the age of 50 even, I don't think we'd be letting people go that were, or holding on to people that were beyond use from that point of view.
Thank you,
and given that the French Legion take on people up to the age of 40, what we have is the likes of the French Legion taking on people at an age where we're actually threatening to let them go.
Thank you. Minister, final reply.
Deputy has never ceased to be a source of wonderment. The Deputy is now in favour of the French Legion. I didn't realise he was a fan of the French Legion. As I said, Deputy to Deputy Troy, this is a meaningful process, and we'll see what comes out of it.
Thank you. That concludes question time.